Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all...
From a foreboding opening image of a cosmic vortex, closely followed by a brutal mass shooting that comes out of nowhere from a single circumscribed perspective, Daniel Isn't Real is a surprising horror film that subverted my expectations with its curveball narrative swerve around about the halfway point of the film. I'll explain the main concept of the story shortly, but I would recommend you watch the film first, before I spoil anything ahead for you. Adapted from the novel In This Way I Was Saved by Brian DeLue, who also co-wrote the script, Daniel Isn't Real initially brings to mind David Fincher's cult classic Fight Club. There's a question of dual personalities, inner demons, and mental illness that seeps into the narrative early on.
He was my best friend.
Did something happen with this friend?
But we're quickly introduced to a young boy named Luke, scampering away from home following a heated argument between his parents. Down the road, he observes the aftermath of a grisly shootout at a diner, where he meets Daniel, a figure only he can see. The two form a fast friendship, playing at sword fighting and getting themselves involved in general tomfoolery the way young boys do.
I've fallen on my rump and squashed bugs bigger than you are!
Until Daniel tricks Luke into poisoning his own mother Claire with her medication, saying that it would give her superpowers. Barely recovering from this act of matricide, Claire forces Luke to lock Daniel away in a dollhouse that resides in their home. We fast forward years later when Luke, played by Miles Robbins, returns from college to visit his mother, who's now been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Luke is your typical feckless teenager. He slouches, he's apathetic, just blank-eyed nihilism and belching.
That is so unfair! I hate you!
After a particular harrowing encounter with Mummy Dearest, he unleashes Daniel, played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, from the dollhouse, and the two friends, one real and one imaginary, pick up where they left off. Daniel becomes a kind of Tyler Durden figure to Luke. He's eminently attractive and charismatic, coaching Luke through various social interactions he'd otherwise fail at. Daniel's not necessarily evil upon these first dealings, with several scenes reminding me of Drop Dead Fred in the way he directs Luke through his humdrum life, much in the way Rick Mell did with Phoebe Cates' character. Phoebe Cates. Oh, Phoebe Cates, one day you will be mine, but alas, you married Kevin Kline. The swine. Oh, hey, that rhymed. I fell heavy, and quickly for her, upon watching Gremlins and Drop Dead Fred, but it wasn't until Fast Times at Ridgemont High that cemented my helpless, unattractive neediness for her that meant that if we actually did meet in real life, the faintest whiff of my desperate musk would send her running for the hills. Daniel's slick. He knows the right things to say in a situation, just like some 90s pickup artist, and the dynamic between the two starts to slowly tilt towards something more insidious. Daniel is not just an imaginary friend, but someone Luke aspires to be, and it's telling in how Daniel's advice often leads Luke to take advantage of a situation. But is Luke at his best when he's listening to Daniel? That's the grey area that the film festers in, and in some respects, the movie concedes that we should listen to our animalistic urges, only we should never neglect our own egos. Director Adam Egypt Mortimer's slight touch never feels self-serving or pretentious, even despite the relatively heavy topics being covered. If there is a message in the movie about mental health and gun violence, Daniel Isn't Real isn't going to answer them for you. I spoke to the director, and here's what he had to say on the subject.
Yeah, I mean, I think the responsibility is to tell the truth, and that was actually something that really started to attract me to this movie early on when I was adapting it. So what I realized once we started working on it was that there were a number of experiences I had in my life that were related to what was going on in this movie that I felt like I could draw on in order to try to make it truthful. So, I had like my best friend growing up for my life had an experience very much like this, a kind of schizophrenic meltdown when we were at the age of these characters. So we had a sort of Luke and Daniel relationship in a way.
Yeah.
And it was very important. It was one of the most traumatic things I've ever been around in my life, and I wanted to really capture what that felt like and what that process was like, and what it's like when you're that age, specifically when you're that age and you're having that kind of a problem, and how hard it is for people around you to recognize what's happening and how difficult it is for you to get help, and also how exciting it might be at first and how horrific it can become. I wanted to capture all of that truthfulness in the movie, and what I've been pleased by is when I've traveled with the movie and screened it, I would, every time I showed the movie, somebody would come up to me and say, I had an experience like this, and I've never seen it depicted like this before, or like people were really happy to see their own experiences reflected in this way. So when we talk about it, I think I have trouble when we talk about it in a generalization, when people say, should we depict mental illness, this thing or that thing, would you say that people, there's like a broadness to the way that people talk about things that I don't understand and don't find helpful. For me, with this specific story, I was trying to be extremely truthful to a true experience, but to do it in a way, what I love about genre is you take a true experience and you externalize it into something that's a little bit more fantastic, and that actually makes it easier to relate to.
All the actors involved seem to really get their teeth into the roles. The young men at the forefront of Daniel Isn't Real seem to utilise the notion that in order to craft a taut psychological thriller, they don't need to descend into silly or highly camp caricatures of the characters. Luke is vulnerable and troubled, but I wanted to find out more about him after the credits had rolled. Patrick Schwarzenegger plays the eponymous imaginary killer with aplomb, but I was hoping for a little more craziness. A crucial scene, embellished with the film's showiest special effects, sees Daniel take control over Luke's body to party, snort cocaine, and have sex with a woman. But I felt that they could have pushed the boat out a little further than the average teenage, let's do drugs and fuck shenanigans.
I have 5 tattoos and I can't wait to get more.
Both actors are at the early stages of their career, so it will be interesting to see where this takes them in the future. The movie also deserves credit for contributing disturbing practical effects, and there's a hyper-stylized feel to everything, as if the filmmaker is channeling earlier David Fincher. Gothic imagery in a style of surreal paintings of Hieronymus Bosch and Francis Bacon resonate through the second half of the movie. We take a trip into Daniel's psyche, and body horror fans will get a hoot out of some of the later scenes involving a psychiatrist. Although intriguing elements are thrown up, such as Daniel being able to take control of Luke a la Patrick Swayze entering Whoopi Goldberg from Ghost styly,
I've got a plan. You see, I figured this thing out. There's something we can do. All we got to do is we can... Look at me.
and that it appears that Daniel may have been around far longer than we can imagine, the third act does devolve into predictable narrative machinations once Luke discovers the truth. Daniel Isn't Real is a promising early feature made by a filmmaker who clearly loves the genre that made Jacob's Ladder a hit, but the homages and their favourite artists are plain to see. There is some predictable psychobabble and mysticism that throws things off kilter a little towards the end, but it's an entertaining film nonetheless. I'd recommend going in to see Daniel Isn't Real without any kind of preconceptions of what the film is, and I think by doing so you'll be far greatly rewarded. It's a small gem of a film that may resonate well with horror fans, and I'm keen to find out the next project from this team.